Hey everybody, let's dive in because we get to do a deeper dive on 20 really cool items right now. And the first one I want to show you, I learned about from Laura Caldwell. I had seen Lapid stoneware from Israel before, but I really didn't pay a lot of attention to it until I was shopping with Laura Caldwell at Springfield, Ohio at the Big Antique Extravaganza, and she noticed some pieces and picked them up, and then I saw them in her video, and I thought, wow, she is right. These are really interesting. And why they're so interesting has to do a little bit with what was happening in Israel. When the nation of Israel was new, it was rather a melting pot because people were coming from a lot of different cultures all over the world. And early on, when it was a more liberal state, Jews and Palestinians and Christians and other people, they worked side by side in the factories and they made these beautiful things. This is a pretty typical vase of theirs. It has a lot to do with Scandinavian modern, and that's why it looks so much like we see from Swedish pottery, but the colors are very much of the desert, and a lot of these forms trace back to Israeli archaeology and interesting sites. And so it's a really interesting blend of what was happening there in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. And at one time, almost every home there had Lapid pottery, and it became very popular elsewhere too, and that's why we see a lot here in America. Here's the mark on the bottom. The bottom signature is actually the first name of the decorator. And that is typical of how Lapid signed their work. They didn't use their last names, just their first. And so each piece is a little different. It's all high-fired stoneware at very, very high reduction. So even though the patterns and the glazes are similar, they all run and they all drip and they all change a little bit in the reduction firing process in the kiln. And that's part of why stoneware and studio pottery is very collectible now. But this was not a pottery studio. This was a full-on pottery maker. They started out making sanitary tile and the kind of things that people need for practical stuff when they're building a country or a city or a house, and then they moved on to housewares, in part because of the influence of Berta Rosenthal. She and her husband had factories in Germany, and she came and helped the founder, a gentleman by the name of Pisach Friedman, to develop an artware line. And it did really well, and it's just really cool. It's got such an interesting blend of different things. You also see a lot with a white base and a lot of blues and browns together. I think those are the things that Laura collects. And it's just really fun. It goes with boho style, it goes with mid-century modern, and it's just got really nice quality and really fun design. The company went out of business in the 1990s when Israel started opening up to more imports. Nowadays, where once there were 20 fairly major ceramic factories in Israel, there are just a handful of studio potters left. So this is something that you can't get new anymore and haven't been able to for a long time, and that's why collectors are discovering it. We are starting this at $9.99. All of these items that you see are going on eBay, and that is courtesy of our members whose contributions on a monthly basis through either our regular memberships or through a Patreon subscription help fund the extra time it takes and the extra resources it takes to put these videos together. So they get first dibs. If you're not a member and you want first dibs, check out the membership link in the description of this video below the dashed line under the links to the eBay descriptions that you see in the description below. Interesting that that brought up Scandinavian design, because this is actually a Scandinavian design. Does it look Scandinavian to you? Well, not exactly. This is the Tonga line, and this was done by Monica Backstrom, and it does have a signature right here. And that's an interesting thing because a lot of her work isn't signed, but it sure should be because she was a fantastic designer. She started with the Boda firm in Sweden before the merger in 1971, and she worked there through about the year 2000. This is a 1990s line, so later in her career. And you see, again, this fusion between cultures. By the 1990s, you see the mix of Scandinavian design with lots of other patterning from cultures all over the world. And this is loosely based on the notion of some of the bark cloth and other designs that you would see on the island of Tonga in the Pacific. It's just really fun. And it's nice because the way it's done, it's kind of reversible, actually. If you are doing a black interior 1 month and then you want to switch to earth tones, well, you just turn it around. And how clever is that? Monica Backstrom was typically known for wild geometric designs that seemed to be in motion. She was one of their best mid-century designers. And that's why she had the idea to fuse this ethnographic design with Scandinavian design. So just like we saw in the Lapide piece, you have a merging of two different cultures, and that's what makes these so fun. And actually, interestingly enough, they go pretty well together. And what I'm finding is that a lot of people who've been collecting a lot of glass are starting to collect ceramics because it's a little different texture, but it blends, and vice versa. Monica Backstrom, of course, is known for the famed mushroom lamp, which is a fantastic piece by Costa Boda. That's probably her most famous design. She also did the shell lamp. She was a very impressive designer, and it's really fun to bring something from her. This is a relatively small piece, and because it was only made in 1990, the market is just starting to realize how hip and cool these are. And because of that, we're just starting it at $9.99. I figure it should probably sell in the $40 range, and we will see now as we drop this on eBay. The First World War really changed a lot of things technologically and also in the way things were done at home after the war. And one of the things that really changed is men went away from using straight razors and going to the barber to be shaved to doing it themselves at home. And that had something to do with kits like these. This was done by Gillette. King Gillette was the inventor of the safety razor. And he thought, boy, they really need something to be able to take care of that themselves. People in a war theater don't really have time to mess around with going to have the tonsorial things done. And a straight razor was an inconvenience. And so this was the little US Service Set. Now, it has lots of typical imagery from the military at the time. You see the eagle with shield, you see the army with the crossed swords and the cannon and the castle, and you see the anchor representing the Navy and the Marines. The U.S. Army commissioned Gillette to do a khaki-colored set that they distributed, and that actually made this very popular, and all of a sudden other people wanted them as well. If you were at home in the States, you could buy the service set and send it to your GI in Europe, and that was how these came to be. The service set, if you lift out the part that says service set, when you turn it over, it's a somewhat bright, although this one's had some age, but this would be used as a mirror. And then in here, and what's nice about this one is that it's got most of its stuff. Slide the top off, and in here are the blades. In this case, the famous Gillette Blue Blade. And so you could change the blades yourself. And that was a big deal because you didn't have to wait to go to the barber shop to get a shave. Then in here you have the stem. You would put your blade in, then you wind the stem together. I'm not going to put a blade in it, even though I need a shave this morning. And then there you go, you're shaving. Something that seems so simple and so basic to us now in this era of electric razors and disposable razors was really a new idea then. And if you're not really into the disposable society, buying these old safety razors and using them is a great way to avoid throwing a lot of plastic in the trash because you just put a new blade on and only the blade goes away when you're done. Then it all fits back right in its nice little case. And you are good until tomorrow. And I want to show you something important. Any sort of case like this, push in the knob before you shut them, because otherwise eventually it will wear out. It obviously has been around for 100 years. This is a true antique now. But eventually, if you use it a lot, you will eventually wear those and they'll get harder to shut. This one's in pretty good condition overall. A little bit of aging on the mirror, but everything is there, including some of the original blades. I'm going to start this at $19.99. I sold one of the khaki ones for about $50 recently. This service set actually usually sells for around $75. So we're going to let it go and see where it goes. Back in the times of ancient Greece, if you passed on and you were very important, a vase would be made, and it would be a figure of your head, and it would be buried with you. That is the beginning of head vases. Then as the Renaissance came, head vases started to be made of really beautiful materials and festooned with jewelry, and they were basically jewelry holders. Well, by the 1940s in the USA, they became very popular again, in large part because of the Glamour Girl head vase, and this is one of those. I believe this one was made by Napco. There were similar varieties by other companies. Sometimes they say Glamour Girl on the bottom, but oh wait, half of her isn't there. Why is that? Because this one is also a wall pocket, also very popular in the 1940s. And we don't see the Glamour Girl wall pocket nearly as much as we see the head vases. They were very, very popular in their time. And they came in a lot of different colorways. I don't see yellow as often. I see green and pink and white and reds more typically. So this one's a little bit different. And she was modeled based on Lana Turner. Lana Turner, besides being a real beauty, was famous for her eyebrows being painted on. Well, the reason they were painted on was because she had to shave her eyebrows for a role in a movie, and they never grew back. So she took it on as her style because she had no choice, and then it became very fashionable. As popular as these were, Napco pretty quickly changed its production from the United States to Japan, as did a lot of different companies, and then head vases really changed. They became more hand-painted and very fine and very pretty, and a lot of celebrities were depicted. One of the most valuable is Jackie Kennedy. There was also an I Love Lucy head vase that's very expensive. The Glamour Girl, on the other hand, considering it is representative of a real celebrity, is a relative bargain because they were so popular that they made a lot, but they did not make so many that were wall pockets. So we're going to start her off at $9.99. Typically, the head vase version sells for about $30, but the wall pocket usually goes for about $45. And we're going to test that theory right now. But I just thought she was really cute. I just got a huge collection of wall pockets, and most of them were kitchen related. A couple of really cute ones with dogs and cats and things like that. But only one Glamour Girl in the whole collection, and this was her. So she is on her way to a new collector now. We're going to put her on eBay, and you can follow along with the listings. One of the reasons that we put these on eBay auctions is we figure it's fun for people to see how things progress, how the bidding goes, whether it sells right away on a buy it now. Not everything is on buy it now, but a lot of these are. And sometimes they sell right away. Sometimes they sell through the auction, and we get a picture of the market that way as to how things are going right now in a big open market that all of us have access to. A couple months ago on eBay, I sold the Mark Belair chop plate. I recently came into 4 of the tumblers, and the tumblers are just great. You don't see a lot of the glassware. He really was a ceramicist, but this design was so popular with this very muscular, physique-focused guy with the nets, obviously doing his work on the beach. And because I just sold the tray, I thought, well, whoever got that might really enjoy the glasses. So I picked these up too. They're pretty collectible, actually. I have a set of 4. Mark Belair started out in Toledo, Ohio. He was born there. He went to the art school there. He was involved with Libby Glass for a little while. So when his design started to become really popular after he split off from Sasha Brastoff in the 50s and started his own factory, well then glassware was a natural thing to follow as it go along with the dinnerware and decorative ware that he was doing in this pattern. And these come in various colors. I have this set of 4 in white. They also came in a clear background and a black background. I like the white background because it's very mid-century in the white with the gold, and it branches into Hollywood Regency, which makes sense because, of course, Sasha Brastoff was a darling of the Hollywood set, and that was what led Mark Belair's designs to be recognized and why he was able to go off on his own and create fairly similar designs in his own studio with lots of verve and lots of motion and very physique-oriented. I think they're just really cool, and the market tends to think these are really cool too. At the time, Giftware magazine called him one of the 10 most influential designers in America in the 1950s, and collectors really do like these. This set of 4 is in perfect condition. We're going to start them at $49, but they typically sell for about twice that. So we're going to let them go and see who's ready to use these for a nice, tall, cool drink during the middle of this very hot summer. We have some costume jewelry this month. I found some interesting pieces that I thought were worth sharing because they all have a different story. And this one, what's so surprising is you look at this and you think, oh, it's hammered copper. It's very mid-century looking. It must be by Rebaje. It looks a little fancier and a little different and hand-hammered compared to a Renoir or Matisse piece. But actually, when we look at this very tiny signature, it says Cororo. Yes, indeed. Cororo briefly made copper jewelry, and they were definitely competing with Renoir, Matisse, and Rebaje because those lines were so popular in the 50s. Cororo was originally the Cohn and Rosenberg company when it started in 1902, and like most of the companies, they were based in Rhode Island. That's where most costume jewelry was made in the United States, and they were very, very much cutting edge. For a long time, they did the duet pins, they did the really interesting 1940s deco pieces, they did the very famous horse head and sets of enameled pieces that look like bees. A lot of their stuff is very collectible now. In this period, they were still trying to go for a higher end market, and so when they saw the success of copper jewelry other people were making, they designed this very fashion-forward piece. I'm going to see if I can put it on so you can see how it lays, even though it will look better on whoever gets this than it will on me. It really lays rather well, and it's surprisingly comfortable, even with my big Adam's apple. Now, this one has a regular clasp. Cororo was known for inventing the J-hook in 1948, where it's just a simple J that clips onto part of the necklace, and that's what holds it on. And so that's one way you can date some of their pieces. If it has a J-hook, that didn't exist before 1948. I just thought this had such an interesting look. I think the colors are good for a lot of people. I'm surprised it actually looks pretty good against my skin. And I never thought of myself as a copper jewelry wearer, but maybe I should be because they say there's benefits from wearing copper. Of course, we know a lot of people wear copper bracelets because there's supposed to be some benefit to having copper against your skin. So I imagine having it around your neck is even better. And I'm enjoying this. I think I'll leave it on for a while. And then somebody can buy it right off my neck because it is going to list on eBay right now. We're going to start this one at $9.99, but the Cororo copper pieces are really, really scarce. They made very little of this because they pretty quickly switched their line to a little less expensive set of things like Aurora Borealis stones and thermoset plastic jewelry and things like that. So there is not much Cororo copper around, and I'm not putting a buy it now on this because I really haven't seen anything like this sell lately. I think it's rather unusual, so I'm very excited to see who will end up being the next person to wear this. I got a neat little collection of playing cards recently. It had the Cards That Talk from Northwest Orient Airlines, back when it was called that, and it had all of the information about Japanese words so you could play cards and study on the plane while you flew to Japan. It had the New York World's Fair cards, and I put those up last month on eBay, and they sold right away to somebody who used to play with that exact deck with his grandmother, and they became lost over the years, and they were so thrilled to get them back. And I thought, you know what? There's one more interesting deck in this collection. I think I should put it on this month, and that is this. This is the Sue line. On one side, it's advertising its freight service. On the other side, it's advertising that it is their 75th anniversary. And this is very shortly before their logo changed. As a kid, I remember having a Sue Line boxcar in my train set, and it just said Sue Line in giant letters on the side of the boxcar. It was very distinctive. And their boxcars were really distinctive, and that was on purpose because they were a fairly short line that went in some pretty obscure directions on purpose. They were founded in Minneapolis in the 1880s to try to get flour from Minneapolis to points east without having to send it through Chicago, where the railroad syndicates were really charging high prices. And so they decided to build a line through Duluth, Minnesota, and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which was huge because then copper was found there. The Duluth iron ore, of course, was a big valuable product, and all of a sudden they had this connection to all these places. What they didn't have was a very direct passenger service, and so they didn't make a lot of playing cards because they didn't run a lot of passenger trains. They were not the most direct way to get anywhere other than from Minneapolis to Winnipeg. That lasted longer than just about all the rest of them. And that's why this deck, which would have come about in 1958 on their 75th anniversary, is fairly scarce because they only made them for the 1 year and they didn't have a ton of passenger lines for people to be picking these up and keeping them. I looked through these. The box is in pretty good condition overall, and the important thing is it does have a joker. There was a period of time that people started collecting and they decided that, well, playing cards are cheap and I'm just going to keep one joker from each deck, and as a result, a lot of the jokers are gone. But this one, I've counted, it has all 52 cards and a joker, so it's a pretty complete set. And that's a nice thing for a collector, especially because a lot of people, these are in good shape and you wouldn't want to treat them roughly, but a lot of people actually use their old card decks and play with them because, unless they're pristine and wrapped and have never been used, well, that's what they're for. And it's the standard bridge size, of course. And, ready slip finish. That's when they started to coat them a little bit so that it was easier to deal them and they wouldn't stick together after being used a lot. Diesel engines were a pretty new thing for the Sioux line in 1958. This is when the steam railroads are being replaced because diesel is more efficient. There's still a neat old 1920s Sioux line headquarter building that is a skyscraper in Minneapolis. We're going to start this again at just $9.99. And I'm not putting a buy it now on this either because I haven't seen any of this particular deck sell, and you just don't see a lot of stuff from them because they didn't run a lot of passenger lines, so there's not a lot of swag. So I think it'll be really fun for a railroad collector or a card collector. This is an advertising fob with the very popular Billiken that came out as a good luck charm around 1910. And this piece would have been made sometime before 1917 because on the bottom it says no caffeine. Dr. Pepper was originally a formulation by a fellow named Charles Alberton who worked for Morrison's drugstore in Waco, Texas. And sometime around 1885 he came up with a secret recipe, so secret that there are two halves to it, and they are kept in two separate safe deposit boxes in Dallas, Texas to this day, so nobody has the full recipe. The watch fob was a giveaway, and of course you would have a leather strap and you would hang your pocket watch from this, and that way you'd have a little good luck charm. It says right on it, "Grin and Win." Billiken was such a popular design when it came out. Attractions including the 1909 Seattle World's Fair and Alaskan tourist trade places adopted it, and to this day it's largely associated with Alaska, even though it didn't originally come from there. This is the original Dr. Pepper bottling company. Charles Alberton gave Morrison's drugstore the formula because he was really mainly interested in coming up with medicines and things that were curatives. And that is part of the reason it did not have caffeine for the longest time, because he was not a proponent of caffeine. There was a lot of discussion in the early days about how adding caffeine might be deleterious to one's health. Ironically, Dr. Pepper is now one of the most caffeinated sodas there is on the market. Dr. Pepper's national fame came after it was rolled out at the St. Louis World's Fair of 1904, and it has been a very popular national brand ever since. A lot of collectors really enjoy Dr. Pepper things, and that's why this is a relatively valuable piece. It could sell anywhere from $50 to $95 potentially. We're going to start it out at less than that and see where it goes. Long, long ago, 150 years ago in fact, uranium glass made its debut. Uranium was used as a colorant because that's the way you got this really bright yellow-green color. And it was specifically to get this shade. This is a few years before they came up with custard glass and Burmese glass at Mount Washington, which also used that as a colorant. Back then, of course, they didn't know anything about radioactivity, They didn't know anything about the fact that uranium was fine in its inert state, but not really a good thing for the glass blowers to breathe, which was a very unfortunate situation. They figured that out eventually, though, but what they didn't figure out until the 20th century was how UVA blacklight rays make this glow like crazy. The federal government did figure out, though, that uranium salt was very important to the war effort, and so after 1941, Fenton had to get rid of all of its custard glass lines because all the uranium was being used in the war effort. And then it was the atomic age, and so until about the 1960s, uranium was not available for production of anything on a civilian level. Once it was, Fenton went back to making custard glass. They recreated Burmese glass, and they had a great time with it as a colorant. Well, that was right about the hippie era. And all of a sudden, blacklights become very popular. Blacklight posters made to reflect in blacklight were very popular. And it started to dawn on people that, oh, Grandma's old yellow vase glows green under a blacklight. But it really wasn't a big thing until about 1990, when that generation of the hippie era grew up, became collectors, rediscovered that this glass glowed under a blacklight. And all of a sudden, this yellow-green Vaseline was very popular again. And a whole lot of companies started making novelties, including Mosser Glass and Degenhardt and Boyd and Fenton. And that's why this cute little kitty cat, which is about 35 years old, came from their factory. And now we have portable blacklights. If mine was working today, I would show you how this glows under a blacklight. Unfortunately, mine has burned out, I just discovered. So you will have to imagine, but you can practically see in this light because it almost glows yellow-green just under this ring light. So it's a really cute little piece. It's only about 2.5 inches tall. It's the seated cat. It is now really popular with collectors, and this little kitty cat should look great in somebody's blacklight case. We are going to start this at $9.99. I haven't seen any of these sell lately, so we're just going to start it off and then let it run. I don't really know what the price should be on this, so we're going to find out together. I love lucite, and what looks better with a Cororo necklace than a lucite purse? Might as well just doll up today, because I do have some other jewelry and fun accessories like this. This one is in really good shape. It's really clean. That's really important. It's not scratched. It is a Charles Kahn. Charles Kahn was the progenitor of the lucite purse industry in Florida. The modeling industry travels south to Miami, and it became a really big thing in Florida. So you see this one has the Charles Kahn label, Miami, Florida, USA on the inside. Now, if it didn't have that label, how would you tell? Well, Charles Kahn had a very distinctive catch where the piece folds up from the bottom and clips. It's very important if you are looking at these online. You need to ask if that clasp works firmly like this one does, because if it doesn't, this is going to pop open and you can't really use the purse. You're just going to look at it on your dresser, which is perfectly fine. But if you're buying these to use, or if you're reselling these and you want top dollar, you need to make sure that they work properly, because they were very popular, and after they got used a few thousand times, sometimes they don't anymore. Another thing about these is they could get cigarette burns, they could warp or yellow in sun. So condition really does matter on these. And this one's in really nice shape. I like that it has the silvering on it. Some are clear, some are colors. Colors are definitely desirable. Some are really funky, interesting shapes. I like this one. It is nice to have the waffle top. I like the color on the bottom because that way you're not seeing everything that someone's carrying in their purse. You're just seeing a really cool purse, and yet you still get the lucite effect. It's got all its feet. That's also important. So those are the things to look for. And that's why these are not necessarily an easy thing to buy online, because it's easy to look at it, think it's great, and then get it and find out it's not. But this one is great. These sold between $5 and $75 when they were new back in the 1950s. Nowadays, we expect to get somewhere in the $100 range for this. We are starting it at $59. I think I've got to buy it now of $120, which is not an unreasonable price for this one. So if you're starting to style yourself for fall or holiday, well, this might be a fun thing to step out with. Another fun thing from the 50s is this toy. This is a Kragston. Kragston was the combination of two people's names, and they started importing battery-operated toys and eventually robots and other cool things from Japan right around the time this was made. That is a 1956 Buick sedan. You can see the portholes on the side. That was a Buick trademark back in the 50s. And I like the graphics. The box is in reasonable shape. It's not perfect. It's missing a little bit of its end. But the important thing is the car is in great shape. Let me take it out to show you. I have not tested this one because I don't have the right size battery. The battery compartment is clean. I'll show you what you need to look for. First of all, the wires are attached and they're not loose. That's important. When you flip open the little battery box, the wires are not loose and it appears to be clean. There's no corrosion. Somebody didn't leave a battery in there for a million years. That doesn't guarantee that these are going to work because they didn't all work when they left the factory. These were made very inexpensively in Japan. People always like to talk about antiques and vintage stuff are so great because the quality is so great. Well, some things are collectible because the quality wasn't great, and most of them are broken and gone by now. And that is definitely true with a lot of these toys. And battery-operated toys from Japan are really hot now because of it. They made a real effort to make sure that this looked like Dad's Buick in the garage because they knew that kids were particular about that, and they could get more money if it was more realistic looking. This one's just super clean. It looks like it was played with very little. They sure were fun for kids back in the day, and that's why they're remembered so nostalgically now. We are starting this one off at $49. They usually sell for about double that in this condition, and we're going to see where it drives off to when this listing closes. Now, I am putting one piece of jewelry up that's relatively contemporary, and I usually don't sell relatively contemporary, but this is special and it's good quality, and I needed to show you. So, this is Fendi, F-E-N-D-I. I just sold a pair of earrings for a friend of mine who I will see at Teak Stock. Connie, I owe you some money. And the necklace came to me just after. I really enjoy the quality of this. Karl Lagerfeld really changed Fendi when he came to work for them in 1965 as a designer. Up until then, they were primarily a furrier, and a very good one, and they were well known in Europe, but they weren't really well known in the United States. And he changed that because he introduced all sorts of different lines, accessories, and indeed jewelry. And the jewelry is rather collectible. This is not inexpensive new. It is good quality. And there are fakes and forgeries. So I'm going to show you a few things about this one so you know how to tell the difference. We know it's newer because it has this hoop and bar arrangement as the clasp. And that's something we see in more contemporary jewelry. But we know it's real because each one of these little sections with the Damascene and this nice design, this modified Greek key and this Art Deco shape, when you turn them over, they all have the Fendi mark, every single one of them. They want to make sure you know that you're getting a real piece by them. And so all of the pieces are marked. The person who gets this will know as soon as they feel it. This one has weight. This is not cheap stuff. This is well made. Even though it's costume and it's gold tone, it has some heft to it. And when you feel it in your hands, it just feels good. And I think that's part of the reason that Fendi has become very, very popular. I think it's a nice design. I'm not going to take off the Cororo because I like the way it looks, but we'll just put this over it. So see, there you go. If you want to go really crazy, you can layer. This is another one where we're going to start it out at $9.99 and just let it roll because I have not seen this particular one sell, but I typically see Fendi pieces like this sell in the 3-digit numbers. So I would expect that it will go for over 100. We're going to put it out there and let people have fun. One of the reasons I do eBay auctions is because, honestly, there are certain things where if there isn't a recent comparable sale, sure, you can look up on WorthPoint, and I know now that eBay has a way that you can go back into their listings more deeply and see what things sold for in the past. But that doesn't really tell you what the market is today. You don't really know until you try. And so some of these things where there hasn't been a sale of another one in recent times, I'm willing to take the chance and put it out at a low price and let the market tell me what the market is right now. Many times, the market likes the thing better than I thought they would, and if I had tried to guess at a price, I would have actually gotten less money. And so, you take the chance that you'll get less, but you also have the opportunity for greater upside. In 1992, Swarovski got the idea to expand its miniature line into little gift box collections called Crystal Memories. They came out in 1993, but this line only lasted for 8 years because then they decided to rename it Crystal Moments. They changed the box, they changed the paperwork. So this one is part of the first generation, and this one is another piece of jewelry. Our jewelry people will be enjoying us this month, I think. This one is this lovely rose pin in the box, and it has a very nice little expression saying "with love" in many, many different languages. It's just very, very sweet and a lovely little gift. And that was the idea, was that these would be sold in gift boxes and that you could just buy it the way it was and present it to somebody like that. Well, Swarovski has changed a lot over the years since this was made. Swarovski is no longer owned by the founding family. And Swarovski also, a few years ago, decided that after decades of being known as the rhinestone supplier to the world for high-quality rhinestones, that they were no longer going to sell rhinestones. They're just going to make their own stuff. And that is a huge, huge change. So all of a sudden, Swarovski is of more collector interest than it's been for a long time. And suddenly the product is not quite as available. And I think that was part of the idea. They want it to be a luxury line. They want it to be high-end. And so these pieces from 30-some years ago now are starting to be rather collectible. This one's going to start at $9.99. We do have a buy it now of $30 on it. It is in the original box. I don't believe it's ever been worn, but now will be its chance. I've been really enjoying my time in the Northwest this summer, and one thing from the Northwest that I've always enjoyed are these. These are C. Allen Johnson figures, and they are well made and they are dated. This particular one is called Lisa, and it says so underneath. There's his signature. This is a later one. This is 1994. C. Allen Johnson started making these in 1958. He was from Edmonds, Washington, but he had a lot of interest in Alaskan ethnography, and he decided that while there were lots of cute figurines, that he could combine cuteness with a more realistic representation of Inuit and Northern Native cultures and their lifestyle while still being cute. He was quite a good sculptor. There is a lot of detail in this, and the decoration is really involved as well. I love all the totemic figures on her. Because most of his wares were designed in the first few years, the late 50s and the early 60s, these later ones, like this one with the 1990 date, are actually relatively scarce because he quit producing in the early 2000s and has passed on since. So there is no more being made by C. Allen Johnson. Just the motion of it all. I just think it's really well done. I've always been a big fan of his stuff, and these things were never really inexpensive. I remember as a child, we'd see these in the gift shops, and they were on the do not touch shelf because they were selling for, gosh, $30, $40, $50 when new. Well, now they sell for about twice or three times that. She potentially could sell and has sold for as much as $160. We're going to start her off at $99 and see where she goes from there. This next item, surprisingly, I have not had one of these before, because in their time they were very, very popular, and there's a reason why. This is a Margaret Keane print, and nowadays, thanks to the movie Big Eyes by Tim Burton, we know the story of Margaret Keane, and we know that she actually did do all the painting and deserved the credit. But for a long time, she didn't get the credit because her husband, Walter, started selling them through the Hungry Eye, a very famous jazz club in San Francisco, and they started to really do well. And he represented it as his own work. And she found out about it. He basically threatened to kill her if she exposed the fact that he was not the painter. Pretty horrible, actually. He apparently was not a very good husband, but he was a good promoter, and he got these in front of a lot of galleries. Andy Warhol famously said, "It can't be bad art because so many people like it." He had a really good point. It was considered kitschy at the time in some ways, but it was so expressive at the same time. And you notice there's a poodle there. That poodle was modeled off of one of their greatest patrons' animals, and that patron is shown on the back of this, where it says, "From the Joan Crawford collection." Joan Crawford got them their first booking in New York and their first exhibition there, and made them a national success. And that's when Keane prints started to be really popular everywhere. Obviously, she was buying the originals, but she was so enamored of them, she allowed her name to be used. And we know Joan Crawford was a tough customer, so the fact that she allowed her name to be used in association with this tells you how much she really, really liked them. They did a portrait of Joan Crawford with her poodles, and that poodle ended up being the model for this. This one is called Lost. At age 10, she presented her mother with a picture of two girls, and one was laughing and one was crying. So she, at a very early age, understood something about comedy and tragedy, drama and pathos, joy and pain, and she reflected that in her art. And I think that reflects some of what Margaret Keane was going through at home. She definitely was in a very unhappy marriage. And if you saw the movie, you know that it came out well in the end, because when she divorced her husband, he tried to claim, because she had publicly stated that he was the artist, that it all belonged to him and that he was the artist. And the court made them have a paint-off. They stood there and watched them paint, and Margaret Keane obviously was the artist, and Walter Keane obviously was not. And because of that, she ended up with the rights to her work. So her tragedy turned to joy later in life, and it all ended up being a happy story for her. She was very successful with these. Margaret Keane passed away in 2022, and there's definitely more interest in these than probably there's ever been. I would not be surprised if it's sold even in this relatively small size for around the $75 figure, and we're going to see now. I love telling these stories because these are real people who are behind the design and the creation and the manufacturing of all of these things that we really love and enjoy, that connect us to our past, that connect us to beauty, that connect us to emotion. And it's just so much fun for me to share their true stories, because a lot of them went through a lot of stuff, and that includes this fellow. Well, she's not a fellow, obviously, but the creator of this is the Schaubach Kunst Company. Heinz Schaubach went to the Wiesbaden Art School in Germany, and after the First World War, he got involved with the prestigious and long-established Wallendorf Porcelain Company. Unfortunately, after the First World War, the country was completely bankrupted. And so their depression started right away. And so Wallendorfer Porcelain went bankrupt in 1926. Well, by then, Schaubach was the head of the art department and the logical person to try to rescue them from bankruptcy. So he ended up taking over the firm, and he really emphasized the artware, and that's what saved them. Look at the beauty and grace of this. They did a lot of dancers. They did some nudes as well, but they all have this motion and this flair to them, and the painting is quite lovely. Kunst means art, so it was Schaubach Art. That was his new name for the company, and it did really well. And then the Second World War came. And unfortunately, after the Second World War, his factory was in East Germany. And the East German government decided that he was not going to make artware anymore. He was going to make functional things for the masses, and that they were going to control the production in the factory. And so he contacted his friend, Mr. Goebel. And that's why you see on this one the Goebel full B mark. So the Goebel company took over from Schaubach Kunst. You see there's also an etched signature there. And so Goebel made these under license from Schaubach Kunst from 1953 until the Schaubach company eventually was liberated from East German control. I think she's just gorgeous. And I think that's part of why a lot of people collect and love these decorative arts, because it does put us in a different place. You can imagine if you love dance, if you love to watch dance, if you love to dance yourself, well, she's just got such a beauty to her. And it just puts you in a wonderful ballroom having a good time. And I think she's just great. She's porcelain, she's really well made, and we're going to list her on eBay now so she can dance her way into the heart of a new collector. And this piece is surprisingly nice. It's made by a company that started out importing Schiaparelli jewelry up until the Depression and did very high-end stuff. Then the Depression came and they started making their own wares. This is the Lissner Company, and it is signed in the 1930s and 40s. They made a lot of lucite jewelry. Then in the 1950s, they started to trade down, and their stuff really, a lot of it was not as well made, but they were one of the first to go from lucite to the thermoset plastic, and a lot of people really loved the colors and brightness of that. But also about that time, they discovered, as everyone did, Aurora Borealis stones. That's where you use the iridescence like you do with carnival glass, but on rhinestones. That hadn't really been done before the 1950s. I'm not sure why. It seems like it would have been such an obvious thing to do back when carnival glass was so popular in the teens and 20s, but when it became popular again in the 50s, the jewelers said, aha, we can do something with this. This one is really nicely encrusted, really well made, has a nice heavy feel. This is much better quality than a lot of Lissner jewelry we see. It's a pretty silver tone. Their silver tended to be rather bright, and this is a very bright and showy piece. And it's big enough to fit my wrist, so I think that makes it about 6.5 inches. Even though this is an unusually good piece of Lissner, we're going to start it at $19, but I've noticed that the sets that have this type of look to them, a full set with all of the pieces, can sell in the $150 range potentially. So I think this is worth more. I suspect that it might sell for around $40 to $50, and we're going to find out together now. It's a very pretty blue as well, and blue is a good color for a lot of people, which is why I thought this was a good thing to share with everybody. Schaubau Kunst went for artware and dancers and lovely figurines. They had a competitor in Bavaria called Schumann at the same time, not the same company. Schumann has a different mark, which I will show you here. This is the 1960s era mark from Bavaria, and it says Artsburg because Artsburg was a big porcelain making district. There is an Artsburg porcelain to this day, although not related to this company. They mainly did hand-painted plates and dishes and very traditional Dresden-like ware that is very collectible now. But they also decided to come up with an art line based on Bauhaus design from the Art Deco era of Germany. And even though this is the 1960s, you can see it's got some Art Deco flair to it. The proportions are good. It's absolutely about form following function. That was the Bauhaus ethos. And the form really does follow the function because it tapers up so that if you're arranging flowers, the stems go this way, and then it's got just enough of a rim to hold them up and let them fan out. But it is so flower power and so poppy and so fun and very modernist, really not like a lot of the things that they typically did. And that's why I thought it would be fun to show this. I just think it's charming. I love the proportion. It's so different than everything else they made. They existed until the 1990s when a lot of the ceramic industry in Europe started to consolidate. So they are no more. But they made some really nice things, and this one is just so different from them, I wanted to share it. This one is going to start at $19.99. It's another piece where I'm not doing a buy it now because there just hasn't been anything like this that's sold recently, and so we don't really have a good idea of what the potential for this piece is, but we're going to find out. Okay, I said that the Lissner was our last piece of jewelry, and I guess I wasn't really telling the truth, but in my mind, this is more sculpture than anything. It is a pin, however. This is called Prisoner of Conscience, and it is by Egil Tumarkin. I hope I'm pronouncing his name fairly right, but you'll be able to practice it because it is very clearly marked on the back. Tumarkin was born in Germany, but his mother was Jewish, and so she took her child and fled to what at the time was the British Mandate of Palestine, which has become Israel since. He studied at Ein Hod, which was a big artist colony in Israel, but then he went back to Europe and he worked in stage design and he did all sorts of interesting things, and he got to see the aftermath of the Second World War, the destruction, the rebuilding, and it really left an impression on him. And that's why brutalism became his way of expressing the violence of the past and the restoration that he hoped would come from that. And I guess in that way he was a lot like Salvador Dali with a lot of his work during his peak period. He also was way ahead of his time because he did a lot of work with found objects. And that was something that wasn't really done in the 50s. So he was considered something of a radical designer at the time and a very good sculptor. He has won awards all over the world. One of his most famous is his sculpture depicting the sign at Auschwitz. So he was not afraid to take on big topics. And so his jewelry really reflects that as well. Not just the sculptural aspect, but the brutalistic modernism of it. And I just think it's really neat. This is called Prisoner of Conscience. It's something that was very popular in its time. And you do see these, although they have different stones depending on how they were set. This one happens to have red. I've seen them with blue as well. It's very good quality, as you can see. And it's very aggressive design. If you are interested in mid-century or if you are interested in brutalism, this is a really interesting piece for somebody who likes this sort of wear. I was really impressed by it, and that's why I wanted to put it out for you. It's starting at $9.99. They typically sell for around $50. And that brings us to the last item that I want to sell, and I've decided to put this on eBay. I've had it a little while. If you followed me a while, you probably saw the video where I found this. This is Salviati. And it is just gorgeous. And it has the dolphins in the base. I have been afraid to put this out anywhere because I don't have a proper showcase for it. And I keep taking it to shows and then I hide it where people can't get to it because I'm afraid it will get broken if handled. And so I've decided that online is the way to sell this. Sometimes certain things work better in the real world to sell, and sometimes things work better online. And I think this is going to be one of those cases. It's so nicely done. The blue riggery is interesting because it sets it off a little bit. It has a lot of gold in it, which means it's likely to have been an earlier piece, probably early 1950s. But Salviati's been around a lot longer than that. They actually started in the mid-1800s, and they've always been experimental. The original founder from the family became famous because he figured out how to do some really interesting enamel work in stained glass. And his work was shown at the 1862 World's Fair in London, and that made him suddenly very successful and very popular, and he was getting commissions from royal houses and wealthy people all over Europe. He even designed some of the stained glass in Westminster Cathedral, and from that tradition, his children and grandchildren, all of them stayed in the glass-blowing business on the island of Murano. So it is Murano glass. In the 1950s, Luciano Gaspari was the art director, and that's when we see a lot of this sort of work done. It's right after the war. It was relatively inexpensive for people in the United States to get Murano glass at that time because the Italian economy was recovering from the war and then went through rounds of inflation and then the terrorism of the Red Brigade. So they had a lot of devaluations of the lira, and that made it very affordable in the United States. But it was still a luxury good, and it wasn't cheap new in spite of all that. And they're definitely not inexpensive today. I expect this will probably sell in the $350 to $450 range. It's possible it might even go higher because it is a nice early piece. Very important when you buy one of these to check all of these little points to make sure they're all there, nothing is broken. This one's in great shape. I really am a fan of these, and every time I have had them, they have sold for good money. I sold a set of the stemware for $2,000 once with this same pattern. So there is a big collector market for these, and we're going to send this off to eBay land right now. So if you're interested in this or anything else, Please do look in the description, click the links. If you want to have access to these bonus videos early, become a member on the level 2 or level 3 membership. It's not very expensive. You can find more information in the description below the dashed line underneath the links to these items on eBay, and follow along. If you are a reseller, it's a great way to see how the market is for these sorts of things now. If you are a collector, it's great to see how your collections might be valuing now. And it gives us a snapshot of how the market is at this point in time. So have fun. It's been so nice getting to explain these wonderful things and talk about them a little bit more and share my love of them with you.
If you enjoyed this video, check out this one. Also, click thumbs up to like this video and check the description for information about our Patreon, our memberships. We've got a lot of different levels with different perks and bonus videos and early content. Also, please do check out our website, theantiquenomad.com, for appraisal help. And we'll see you again for more adventures in the antique and vintage community soon. Bye for now.